I swear this isn't some made-up story. One morning, I stepped outside and noticed an HOA sign stuck into the ground by my lake, as if someone had just staked their claim overnight. My lake, the one I paid for, restored and took care of. Then she showed up shouting, "You don't own this, we do," and slapped her binder down onto my table. After that came the letters, the inspections I never signed for, neighbors whispering like I was some kind of outlaw. It didn't feel like a simple dispute anymore. It felt like I was being tracked by a system I never signed up for. And the craziest part, every time I thought it couldn't escalate any further, it somehow did. Let me know in the comments if you've ever been caught off guard like this. I was sitting on my cabin porch, gazing at the lake I just revived, when she rolled up in a silver sedan that looked way too pristine for a dirt road. The woman who got out wore a blazer that probably cost more than my monthly bill. She had this smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, the kind you get from people who think they're about to win. I watched her smooth out her skirt and stride toward me like she owned the place. Spoiler alert, she did. She introduced herself as Diane Mercer, president of the Homeowners Association. I didn't even know there was an HOA out here. This was rural land, cabins spaced out with acres between them, not some suburban nightmare with matching mailboxes. But fine, I thought, maybe she's here to welcome me to the neighborhood. Maybe she brought cookies. She did. Instead, she pulled out this red binder, opened it up, and slid a document across my wooden table. "This lake," she said, tapping the paper with one perfectly manicured nail, "is under a conservation easement, community property. We'll need to talk about access and usage fees. I'm a licensed water rights engineer. My job involves reading permits, studying riparian laws, and making sure everything about water use is legal and above board." So, when I looked at her document, I knew something wasn't right. There was no state filing number, no official seal, no witness signatures from a county recorder. Just some words on paper made to look important. I leaned back in my chair, trying to process the nerve. "This isn't a legitimate easement," I said, keeping my voice calm. "There's no registration number." "Where's the original filing?" Diane's smile grew tighter. "It's on file with the county," she insisted. "This is a certified copy." I opened my binder, the one I keep for exactly these situations. Inside were my permits, the water deed recorded with the state, photos documenting the restoration, receipts for every pump and every load of gravel. I slid it toward her. "Here's my deed, recorded 2 years ago. Water rights, attached. Riparian ownership clearly stated. If there was an easement, it would have come up during the title search." I watched her eyes scan the pages, her polished confidence starting to crack. She stood up straighter, arms crossed. "Well, conservation law overrides private ownership in certain cases," she said, her voice as rehearsed as if she were reading from a script. "We'll be filing a formal request with the county to clarify jurisdiction." The thing about working in water rights is you quickly learn that people will try anything to control resources. Lakes, streams, wells. If it's water, someone wants it, and they'll throw around legal jargon to get you to back down. But I've spent years in permit offices dealing with actual government officials who know the rules. I know what legitimate documents look like. This wasn't one of them. "Conservation easements require a state environmental review," I told her. "Public notice periods, compensation agreements. You'd have documentation from Fish and Wildlife, from the county planning office. None of that's here, is it?" Diane's jaw clenched. She snatched up her binder, snapped it shut with more force than necessary. "You'll be hearing from our attorney," she said, turning on her heel. I watched her car kick up dust as she drove off, leaving me sitting there with a cold cup of coffee in my hands. Part of me wanted to laugh at her audacity. She'd come onto my property with fake documents, expecting me to just hand over a lake I'd spent months restoring, but another part of me felt the weight of the situation settling in. People like her don't just give up, they escalate. I pulled out my phone and snapped photos of the document before she could claim I'd misrepresented it. I then shot an email to the county permit office, attaching images and asking for confirmation about any conservation filings related to my property. 2 days later, the response came, "No easements on file," but there was an inspection request bearing my forged signature. Fraud. Someone was trying to fabricate a legal issue. I knew exactly who it was. I called County Surveyor James Mitchell, who remembered my permits. "I'll verify your boundary markers," he said. A week later, he walked the shoreline, snapped photos of the survey monuments, and checked the records. "Your deed's solid," he confirmed, packing up his gear. "Riparian rights are clearly attached. Whoever filed that inspection request doesn't have standing. I'll submit my findings to the county to get this sorted." But even as he said that, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Diane hadn't struck me as someone who'd give up after a single failed attempt. She'd come at me with fake conservation papers, forged documents to trigger inspections. What would she try next? That evening, I sat on my porch, watching the sunset over the lake. The water was clear now, fish darting near the surface, just the way it should be. I'd followed every rule, secured every permit, done everything by the book. Yet someone was trying to take it all away with lies and forgery. The worst part? I had no clue what Diane Mercer stood to gain from claiming my lake. Then my phone buzzed with a new email. Subject: inspection request update. I opened it, heart racing. The county had reviewed James Mitchell's survey results, cross-referenced the forged signature with my actual documentation. The inspection request was flagged as fraudulent, and an investigation was launched into who had filed it. I should have felt relief, but all I felt was a gnawing unease. Because if Diane was willing to commit fraud over a lake, what else might she be capable of? I saved that email, adding it to my growing file of evidence. Something told me I'd need every scrap of proof I could get. This battle wasn't over. It was just getting started. I was mid-swing with the hammer when Cynthia Cole stormed up, dragging half the neighborhood behind her like they were attending a courtroom session. She didn't point. She marched straight to the edge of the lake and stuck a small HOA sign in the dirt. "This is now an HOA amenity," she declared. I froze mid-swing. Really? She's claiming ownership of my lake now? I'd been receiving bizarre warning letters for weeks, alleging vague violations along my shoreline. "Hold on," I told the driver, dialing the sheriff's office. The deputy who answered sounded skeptical at first, treating it as a neighbor dispute he'd have to mediate. But when I mentioned my recorded easement and showed him photos of the roadblock that hadn't been there the day before, his tone changed. "Don't touch anything. I'm sending someone to log this. It could be criminal encroachment." While waiting, I walked around the obstruction, photographing every angle. Posts were sunk into fresh concrete. Whoever did this had worked through the night, mixing cement, setting poles, and constructing something permanent. Deputy Mark Lewis arrived within the hour. A stocky guy with tired eyes, he looked like he'd seen it all before. He inspected the roadblock, checked my deed on his tablet, and walked to where my easement was marked. "Yeah, this is unlawful entry. Whoever put this up did so right on your deed's right-of-way. Criminal offense," he said. He photographed the scene, took measurements, and filled out an official report. Cynthia dragged a chain across the fence rail, declaring that the new community barriers now included my entire ranch. When Deputy Benson calmly asked for any permits, Cynthia's eyes darted sideways before she muttered, "They're pending final approval." The deputy raised an eyebrow, the kind that suggested he'd dealt with this act before. "Just a heads up, 911 is for real emergencies, not for staking fake claims in front of an audience," he reminded her. Cynthia watched every move I made with those cold, unblinking eyes, like a predator eyeing its prey. When our gazes met, she gave me a smirk that felt more like a threat than a smile. "I am the law here," she whispered. Her lips barely moved, just low enough to avoid being overheard, but sharp enough to pierce through me. The county map, neatly folded and notarized, was in my back pocket, just waiting for the right moment, but my instincts told me to wait. Let her squirm a little longer, let her believe she had the upper hand. Some people reveal more when they think they've already won. I asked Deputy Lewis, "Do you know who might have done this?" I told him about Diane, the fake documents, the forged inspection. His expression stiffened. "So, this is ongoing harassment," he said. He made a call, and within 20 minutes, another patrol car showed up. Deputies huddled together and then approached. "We're ordering immediate removal," one of them said. "This is blocking legal access. We'll contact the HOA president. If this structure isn't down today, we'll remove it ourselves." I felt a sense of vindication. Finally, someone with real authority was seeing through Diane's schemes, but the anger was still there. She'd committed fraud with the inspection and now trespassed with this roadblock. She was racking up crimes. What happens when someone gets this reckless? The gravel driver was still waiting with his engine running. I apologized for the delay. It should be cleared soon. He shrugged. "I've seen worse. Last month someone put up a fake bridge-out sign. People get weird about land." The deputies wrapped up the official report. "We'll follow up to make sure the roadblock comes down," one of them said. I went back to review the security footage I had installed after Diane's first visit. Something about those fake papers had set off alarm bells. It was a basic wireless setup covering the access road and shoreline cabin approach. I scrolled through the previous night's footage. At 2:17 a.m., headlights appeared, a pickup truck with no plates visible, 2 figures unloading fence posts. I couldn't make out their faces in the dark, but the work was purposeful. Measuring, marking, digging. This had been planned. I saved the video, backed it up to 3 drives, and sent a copy to Deputy Lewis with the timestamps. If Diane tried to claim ignorance, this footage would show someone with resources was behind it. And who else could have had a motive? An hour later, the deputy called back. Got your video, adding it to the case file. The HOA president claims she has no knowledge of the situation. She insists it must have been members acting without proper authorization, but we checked county records. Materials had been purchased using an HOA account. There was a credit card trail that made me stop in my tracks. The HOA credit card had been used for illegal construction on my property. This wasn't just rogue members, it was organizational resources being misused. Either Diane had ordered it, or someone high up in the HOA was aware of it. Either way, the group she led was committing crimes on my land. I thought about the other homeowners. Did they know their dues were being used to fund harassment? The roadblock came down that afternoon. A crew arrived, cut the locks, pulled posts from the concrete, loaded everything up, and drove off, leaving raw holes where the fence had been. The gravel delivery finally made it through, but as I gave directions for where to dump it, I noticed fresh tire tracks leading down to my shoreline, deep treads from work trucks. Someone had been there recently. I followed the tracks, a gut feeling telling me I wouldn't like what I found. I was right. My water valve now had a new lock, not my lock, someone else's. I tried my key, but it didn't fit. Someone had accessed my equipment and locked me out of my own water system. I stood there staring at that unfamiliar padlock, and it clicked. This wasn't about the lake. This was about control. Diane couldn't legally take the property, so she was making it unusable. Block access, lock up the equipment, create enough problems that I'd eventually give up. But she didn't understand. I'm an engineer. I document everything. I don't back down when I'm in the right. I photographed the unauthorized lock, noted the time, and called my attorney. They're not stopping, I said. Now they've tampered with water control equipment. This isn't just unlawful entry, it's potential infrastructure sabotage. He sighed, a man witnessing a simple dispute spiral out of control. I'll add this to the filing, but Mason, this is heading toward litigation. Criminal charges, civil suits, it's going to get ugly. I knew he was right, but what choice did I have? Let Diane steal my lake through intimidation? Let her lock me out? No. I would fight this the right way with evidence, the law, and every legitimate tool at my disposal. And if she kept escalating, eventually the system would stop her. It had to. That night I reviewed the video footage again. Sure enough, there it was. A vehicle approaching the shoreline around noon, right when the roadblock crew was wrapping up. Someone was taking advantage of the distraction. A figure in a dark jacket moved quickly to the valve, swapping locks. The footage wasn't clear enough to identify the person, but the timing was too perfect. This was coordinated, strategic. Then I noticed something else. The figure checked their phone before approaching, as if confirming something, like they were following instructions. That's when it hit me. Diane had help. There were people willing to commit crimes on her behalf. This wasn't one angry HOA president. This was a well-organized effort. The security footage showed someone testing my valve lock at midnight. When I walked into the community center, it smelled like burnt coffee. I hadn't planned on attending until Mrs. Henderson called. Diane was holding an emergency session, claiming my lake restoration was causing problems. You might want to be there, she said. So, here I was, walking into a room where people had likely already decided I was the villain. Diane stood near a projector, greeting people like she was hosting an event. She noticed me right away. Her smile didn't budge, but something cold flickered in her eyes. Mason, so glad you could join us. We're discussing community safety concerns. I took a seat in the back. Most faces were unfamiliar. A few nodded, but others avoided eye contact, already taking sides. Diane started her slick manipulation. She showed before and after photos, then a flood map. This area is prone to flash flooding, she warned. With more water held upstream, homes could flood. We need to ask if one project is putting all of us at risk. She kept using our as if the lake was a shared community resource. My jaw clenched. She was twisting hydrology to create fear. I'd installed overflow controls, graded the shoreline, everything to prevent exactly what she was now suggesting. A man in a flannel shirt asked, "Was there an engineering assessment?" Diane put on her sympathy act. That's the issue. These modifications were made without community input. Now we're just starting to see the risks. I couldn't stay silent. I stood up. That's not accurate. Every aspect was approved by the county. I have drainage reports and environmental assessments. There's no increased flood risk. Diane's smile tightened. I'm sure you believe that, but what if you're wrong? What if the next storm proves your calculations inadequate? Who pays for the damage then? The room shifted. I could feel it. People who had been neutral were now starting to doubt. Diane had framed it perfectly. She was just asking questions, playing the responsible leader, and I was the outsider who had changed things without asking for permission. I have historical flood data going back 30 years, I said. The restoration doesn't increase risk, it mitigates it. Diane waved dismissively. We'd need independent verification, not just the word of someone with a vested interest. She turned back to the crowd, effectively cutting me off. This is why I've asked the county for a formal safety review. If Mason's work is safe, the review will confirm it, but if there are problems we need to know before disaster strikes. It sounded reasonable, which made it all the more dangerous. Most people in the room didn't understand hydrology. They just heard flood risk and assumed it was a legitimate concern. I sat back down, a bitter taste in my mouth. Diane was turning the community against me, making me the target. Mrs. Henderson caught my eye from across the room, shaking her head. At least one person wasn't buying it. After the meeting, people filed out quickly, avoiding eye contact. I waited until most had left, then approached Diane. Quite the performance. Shame none of it was true. She looked up at me with cold certainty. Everything I said was factual. There are flood risks. Your lake holds more water. These are real concerns. I leaned in. Concerns you invented. My restoration reduces flood risk, you know that. Diane snapped her laptop shut. What I know is that you've unsettled this community. Maybe if you'd been more cooperative, we wouldn't be here. Cooperative? I echoed. You mean obedient? Obedient means surrendering my lake. Mrs. Henderson leaned over and whispered, Be careful. Diane's been calling around, questioning your stability. My anger flared. That's defamation. I did volunteer accounting for the HOA, she added. When I questioned the high expenses, I was dismissed. I think Diane has financial problems. That might be why she wants your lake. If I'm right, she won't stop until she either gets it or destroys you trying. I thanked her, watching her drive away. I'd been fighting this as a property rights issue, but if Diane was in financial trouble, rules no longer mattered. She had already shown that with fraud and trespass. I dug into Diane's records and discovered a lien from gambling debts and HOA payments to shell companies. Mrs. Henderson had been right. Diane had money problems and was using the HOA to funnel funds. If she controlled my lake, she could pull in steady revenue. I saved the information and sent it to Deputy Lewis. He responded quickly, forwarding it to the fraud investigation team. Mrs. Henderson leaned in and whispered, Diane's been asking about your business clients. The call came Tuesday morning while I was reviewing permits. My phone rang. It was Jennifer Caldwell, a longtime client. Hey Jennifer, I answered. There was an uncomfortable pause. Mason, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest, she said. My stomach dropped. Something was very wrong. Of course, what's going on? I replied. Another pause. I got a call yesterday from someone concerned about your professional conduct. She said you've been having issues, legal troubles, disputes that might affect your judgment. She wanted to know if I'd experienced any problems working with you. I closed my eyes. Diane, I muttered. Of course, it's her. Jennifer, that's completely false. Someone's running a harassment campaign because of a property dispute. I can explain everything. She sighed. I figured as much. You've always been reliable, but this woman sounded convincing. She had details? Made it sound like there was a pattern. Details. Diane had done her homework. She had twisted everything into a narrative of instability. What did you tell her? I asked. I told her I'd never had any issues and ended the call. But Mason, she didn't just call me. She mentioned having a list of your clients, said she was doing due diligence to protect the community. A list? I repeated. She's systematically contacting your clients, Jennifer said. This is targeted economic warfare. She's trying to destroy your business because you won't give up your property. I thanked Jennifer and immediately started calling other active clients. The first 3 hadn't been contacted yet, but the 4th, a developer I had been working with, wasn't as understanding. Look Mason, I don't know what's going on, but I can't have drama affecting my projects. I'm going to pause our contract until this is sorted out. I tried to explain, but he'd already made up his mind. When things settle down, give me a call. For now, I need to protect my interests. He hung up. $15,000 in contracted work, gone. Over the next 2 days, 3 more clients called, all expressing the same concern, each one contacted by a woman questioning my stability. One was considering hiring another engineer and another had already started the process. By Thursday I'd lost over Not because of anything I'd done, but because Diane was running a systematic campaign to destroy me. I documented every call, recorded the ones where clients gave their permission, and got them to forward the voicemails Diane had left. Her voice sounded so reasonable, so I'm just worried about the community. Mason seems to be going through something. I'd hate for your project to suffer because of his personal issues. She never made direct accusations, just asked leading questions, raised doubts. Sophisticated character assassination that was devastatingly effective. I called my attorney, and he delivered the bad news I already knew. Defamation cases are tough to win, especially when the statements are vague enough to be considered opinion. I emailed the full report to the county cover letter, bolded and blunt. I attached drone clips, time-stamped footage, proof of the roadblock, evidence of the water tampering. Silence. 2 days passed with nothing. Then I received one email. Please submit notarized records. My heart skipped. Was that hesitation or just bureaucracy? Either way, I had everything ready. This wasn't just evidence, it was ammunition, and I was done playing defense. Diane sent a formal accusation, claiming I'd obstructed water flow and disrupted natural patterns. She cited some gardening manual's code as her reference. I opened elevation maps, runoff charts, rainfall histories, hell, I even simulated flow paths using terrain overlays. I sent it back with bold red highlights and footnotes, but I knew better. She wasn't trying to win legally. She was trying to drain my energy, not just my lake. I reread their letters late that night, shadows stretching across my kitchen table. My records showed I was right. Every deed, every plat map, but the anger kept burning. What if they had buried something in old bylaws? What if I'd missed a clause? I hated the fury. I hated how they were making truth feel unstable. This wasn't just about land anymore, it was about principle. It was about reality. If the HOA wanted to rewrite the map, they'd have to do it in court, on record, under oath. I wasn't bluffing, not now, not after everything they tried to bury under fake signs and fresh concrete. I asked if she'd found anything else in the HOA's financials. Not yet, she said, but I have a friend, Rebecca Shaw. She's a CPA with forensic training, and she lives in the HOA community. If anyone can dig into those books and find proof, it's her. I agreed immediately. I needed all the help I could get. If Rebecca could uncover financial misconduct, show that Diane was embezzling, that might be enough to stop her. That evening, Rebecca called. Professional but cautious, Mrs. Henderson had explained the situation to her. I'm willing to help, but you need to understand the position this puts me in. I live here. Diane is my HOA president. If I investigate and she finds out, I could face serious social consequences. I understood more than she knew. If Diane was doing what I suspected, she wasn't just hurting me. She was stealing from everyone in the HOA. Rebecca fell silent. All right then. I'll need access to the records, bank statements, vendor contracts, anything that shows the flow of money. Mrs. Henderson still had contacts. Between the three of us, we might be able to piece together enough evidence for Rebecca to work with. It wasn't much, but it was something, a way to fight back. I heard Diane's voice on the recording. He's unstable and potentially harmful. Rebecca Shaw sat in her home office at 11 p.m. staring at spreadsheets that made no sense. The numbers were there, neat columns of expenses and revenue, but something was wrong. She'd been in accounting long enough to recognize when books had been tampered with. The HOA financials she had finally gotten her hands on showed a clear pattern: vendor payments to companies that barely existed, consulting fees for services that were never rendered, and equipment purchases inflated by 30. She cross-referenced business registrations. Most of these vendors had been created in the last 3 years, all listed under the same registered agent, shell companies. That's what they looked like, entities set up to funnel money out of the association. And the person who had approved these contracts? Diane Mercer. Rebecca leaned back in her chair, feeling a wave of emptiness. She had lived in the community for 8 years, trusted Diane to manage shared resources, and all this time, Diane had been stealing. Her phone buzzed, a text from another HOA member. Heard you're looking into the books. Be careful. Diane's asking questions about who's snooping. Word was getting out. If Diane knew someone was investigating, she'd start covering her tracks. Rebecca thought about Mason Reed, the man Diane had painted as unstable. Rebecca had been at that meeting. At the time, she believed Diane's performance. But now, seeing the financials, everything had shifted. She pulled up the timeline Mrs. Henderson had sent. Mason had bought the lake 2 years ago, right when payments to the shell companies started increasing. Diane must have seen the lake as a resource, an opportunity to exploit, maybe even lease it out commercially. But Mason had legal ownership, so Diane had to discredit him and drive him away. When that didn't work, she escalated to professional sabotage. Rebecca saved her analysis and backed it up to 3 drives. Then she called Mason directly. He picked up on the second ring. She introduced herself and explained what she'd found, listening to his sharp intake of breath when she detailed the shell companies. "How much are we talking about?" he asked, his voice tight. She checked her calculations over 3 years, at least $45,000 in fraudulent payments. Probably more. This is systematic embezzlement. Mason stayed quiet, his voice tight when he spoke. "Can you prove it legally?" Rebecca could document the pattern, show the shell companies, inflated payments, Diane's signature, but she'd need subpoena power to trace where the money had gone. "What I have now is strong circumstantial evidence, enough to trigger an investigation, but I'd need to testify," she said. That was the key question. Was she willing to turn against someone she'd trusted? She thought about the HOA members, faithfully paying their dues. She thought about Mason losing his business. "Yes, I'll testify, I'll provide everything. This is fraud." After the call ended, Rebecca sat in silence, feeling the weight of what she was about to do. Her phone buzzed with a new text. "People are saying you're helping that lake guy, the one causing problems. Is it true?" She stared at the message, realizing how the narrative had already solidified. She typed a response. "I'm helping expose financial fraud. Diane's been embezzling from the HOA. I have proof." She hit send before second-guessing herself. The 3 dots appeared, stopped, then started again. Finally, "That's serious. Are you sure?" Rebecca sent over a simplified breakdown. She watched the dots appear and disappear again. "Oh my God, does anyone else know?" She explained about Mrs. Henderson's suspicions. "We need to take this to the full board." But that's where it got complicated. Most of the board was loyal to Diane. Bringing the accusations would only tip her off, giving her advanced warning. "No," Rebecca replied, "we need to go straight to the authorities, make it official before Diane knows what's coming." The next morning, Rebecca called Deputy Lewis. "I have documentation of financial irregularities, fraudulent vendor payments, and evidence of embezzlement. This relates to your case against Diane Mercer." She could hear papers rustling in the background. "Can you send what you have?" She did, compressing all spreadsheets, analysis, and evidence into one package. Then she waited. By afternoon, the phone rang constantly. HOA members who had heard the rumors, friends demanding to know if she'd really accused Diane of theft. Neighbors quickly became distant, blaming Rebecca for breaking the community's trust. One call particularly stung. It was a woman she had carpooled with. "How could you do this? Diane's done so much for us. You're helping that Reed guy, aren't you?" Rebecca tried to explain, but it was too late. Emotion had already won. To these people, Diane was their leader. Rebecca was the traitor. She ended the call feeling completely drained inside. This was the cost of truth. That evening, Mrs. Henderson stopped by. "I heard what happened, the calls, the backlash. I'm so sorry." Rebecca asked, "Did you find anything else?" Mrs. Henderson nodded, pulling out a folder. "I got access to archived records, went back to 1998, found something interesting. Diane authorized modifications to Mason's lake valve system. $8,000, no board approval. Just her signature." Rebecca felt the tension spike. 1998, long before Mason even owned the lake, she studied the documents. The valve modifications had allowed downstream water diversion, giving the HOA theoretical control. That meant Diane had been planning this for years, waiting for the right moment. She'd been setting this up from the beginning. Every move had been part of a larger strategy. Rebecca added the 1998 receipt to her evidence. "Deputy Lewis needs to see this," but as she prepared to send the new evidence, her doorbell rang. 3 HOA board members stood at her doorstep. Their faces were hostile. "We need to talk about these accusations you're spreading," one of them said. Rebecca's heart pounded. This was the confrontation she had been dreading. They crowded into her living room. "Diane served this HOA, and you're ruining her reputation," another board member added. Rebecca opened her laptop. "I have documentation." They wouldn't even look at it. "Financials can be misread," one board member said. "You're being manipulated." That stung. "I'm a CPA. This is fraud," Rebecca shot back. The board members exchanged glances, then one of them said, "We're calling an emergency meeting about your conduct." After that, they left. Mrs. Henderson whispered as they walked out, "They'll try to force you out." Rebecca's phone buzzed. A text from Mason. "Deputy Lewis just called. Fraud unit is opening a formal investigation. Your evidence was enough. They're going after Diane officially. She read the message 3 times. The system was moving. Accountability was in progress. Whatever social cost Rebecca was paying, it was working. She texted back, "Good. Let them investigate. I'm not backing down. This is about choosing courage over comfort." Rebecca had made her choice. The 1998 receipt showed Diane had authorized $8,000 in modifications without board approval. Thursday morning, Patricia Williams from State Fish and Wildlife arrived, clipboard in hand. Rebecca met her at the shoreline, where the morning light reflected off the water so clearly you could see straight to the bottom. Patricia paused, taking in the restored ecosystem. "This is the lake causing all the controversy?" she asked. "Looks pretty well managed to me." Rebecca handed her a folder filled with permits and environmental assessments. "Everything has been done by the book, but someone is claiming my restoration violates environmental regulations." Patricia flipped through the documentation. "Who filed the complaint?" Rebecca hesitated. "The HOA president, Diane Mercer. She's been running a campaign to claim community ownership of my private property." Patricia's expression didn't change, but something shifted, recognition perhaps, and the environmental concerns had only appeared after Diane failed to get what she wanted. Patricia sighed. "Let's do a complete assessment. If your work is as clean as these permits suggest, we'll document it officially." They spent 3 hours at the lake. Patricia collected water samples, measured oxygen levels, documented plant species. She brought specialized equipment, dissolved oxygen meters, turbidity sensors, biological assessment tools. Every test, every measurement, she recorded with meticulous care. This was a scientist following protocols. Watching her work, Rebecca felt something she hadn't in weeks: hope. Because science doesn't lie. If the restoration was sound, Patricia's assessment would prove it. Patricia was examining sediment samples when a car pulled up. Rebecca tensed. Diane stepped out, followed by a man in an ill-fitting suit. "Inspector Williams, I'm glad you're here," Diane said, stepping forward. "This is Dr. Gerald Winters, an environmental consultant. He's conducted his own assessment and found significant concerns." Patricia straightened, eyeing the newcomer with professional skepticism. "Dr. Winters, what organization are you with?" The man cleared his throat. "I'm an independent consultant specializing in watershed management." Patricia's expression remained neutral. "And your credentials?" Dr. Winters opened his briefcase, pulling out papers. "I have a doctorate in environmental studies from Westfield University, 20 years of experience." Patricia scanned his credentials, then pulled out her phone, starting to type. The silence stretched thick and uncomfortable. Diane shifted her weight, her smile faltering. Finally, Patricia looked up. Westfield University closed in 2003. It was never accredited for environmental science programs. "Dr. Winters, are these credentials fabricated?" The color drained from Dr. Winters' face. Diane's eyes widened. "That's impossible. He came highly recommended." Patricia's tone sharpened. "By whom?" "Because legitimate consultants are registered with state agencies. Dr. Winters doesn't appear in any of our databases." Dr. Winters stammered, trying to explain, but Patricia had already documented his false credentials. "Presenting fake qualifications to influence a state investigation is a crime," Patricia said, her voice cold. "I suggest you leave." The man grabbed his briefcase and bolted. Diane stood frozen, watching him flee. For the first time, I saw her completely off balance, exposed. Patricia turned to Diane. "Did you verify his credentials?" Diane's mouth opened, then closed. "I trusted my sources." Patricia made a few notes, because hiring false experts is grounds for serious penalties. If you're part of a scheme to mislead regulatory oversight, that's a federal offense. I watched as Diane realized just how badly she'd miscalculated. "I think we're done here," Diane said, her voice tight. Patricia didn't even look up. "Meanwhile, I'll be including your attempt to introduce forged expert testimony in my report. The district attorney may find that interesting." Diane left without saying another word. Patricia returned to her testing, working for another hour. When she finally packed up her equipment, she handed me a preliminary finding sheet. "Water quality is excellent," she said. "The ecosystem is showing healthy biodiversity. Your aeration system is functioning optimally. There's no evidence of downstream contamination." She paused, meeting my eyes. "Mr. Reed, I've done hundreds of these assessments. This is one of the best managed private restoration projects I've seen. Whoever filed this complaint either doesn't understand environmental science or was deliberately abusing state resources." I felt vindicated. "So, the complaint will be dismissed?" I asked. Patricia confirmed, "Dismissed and flagged. Any future complaints from the same source will face enhanced scrutiny. She handed me copies of the report. Keep these. If this dispute continues, this assessment will support your case. After she left, I sat on the dock, the weight of official validation from a state inspector sinking in. Scientific proof that my restoration was exemplary. Diane had tried to use environmental concerns against me, but instead she had handed me the strongest defense possible, expert testimony from a government agency. My phone buzzed. It was Rebecca's number. "Mason, you need to hear this," she said. I found communication between Diane and a commercial fishing operation. They were negotiating lease terms for the lake? I asked, my mind racing. Yup, this was 6 months before you even bought the property. She confirmed. She was planning to monetize it. The lease would have paid the HOA $30,000 annually, but it required HOA ownership or management control. When you bought the property with clear title, that deal fell apart. $30,000, a tidy sum to cover gambling debts, to mask embezzlement. The fishing company is still interested, Rebecca continued. I found recent emails asking Diane about the timeline for securing access. She kept telling them it was being handled. That's why she's been so aggressive. She'd already promised them the lake. Her credibility depends on delivering. Everything clicked, the fake papers, the encroachment, the professional sabotage. Diane was trying to fulfill a business deal based on access she never had legal right to. Can you forward me those emails? I asked. They establish motive, show premeditation. Rebecca hesitated before agreeing. Mason, be careful. She's cornered now. The fraud investigation is moving forward. Her fake expert has been exposed. The deal she promised is falling apart. I knew she was right, but with Patricia's assessment, Rebecca's financial evidence, and the mounting criminal charges, Diane was running out of moves. She could threaten, but she couldn't change facts, and she couldn't alter official documentation. That night, I organized everything into a comprehensive case file. Patricia's assessment was at the top. Below it, Rebecca's financial evidence, police reports, client statements, threatening texts, security footage, hundreds of pages showing a clear pattern of deceit. Diane Mercer had waged war on a property owner who'd done nothing wrong, and now she had lost. The next morning, County Surveyor James Mitchell called. There's an administrative hearing scheduled for next week. Your property rights case, he said. My stomach tightened. She's still pushing this. Even with everything, James sounded tired. Her attorney filed a motion claiming adverse possession, historical community usage. The judge will hear arguments and make a ruling. This was it, the formal legal battle. Everything was about to come out. Part of me dreaded it, but another part of me felt ready. I had truth on my side. I'll be there with documentation, I said. He chuckled darkly. Bring a dolly, you'll need it for all those files. I spent the next week preparing, organizing exhibits, coordinating with Rebecca and Patricia for their testimony. Deputy Lewis confirmed he'd be there to present the criminal findings. Everything was converging. The night before the hearing, I stood by my lake, watching the sunset over water I'd worked so hard to restore. Diane had tried every tactic, but none of it had worked because I had documented everything. Tomorrow, justice would have its say. Inspector Williams had said, this case will set a precedent for water rights protection. The administrative hearing room was smaller than I expected. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and the gray walls and cheap paneling gave the place an almost institutional feel. But this was where it would end, where months of harassment and fraud would finally face judgment. I set my boxes of evidence on the table, organized by category: property deeds, environmental reports, criminal documentation, financial fraud evidence, everything labeled and indexed, ready to go. Across the room, Diane sat with her attorney, a sharp-looking woman who kept glancing at my boxes with obvious concern. The administrative law judge, Margaret Hartwell, entered. Her steel-gray hair and stern expression made it clear she'd heard every excuse imaginable. She reviewed the case file, then looked up. This is a hearing regarding property jurisdiction. Ms. Mercer, you filed a petition claiming HOA authority over a body of water owned by Mr. Reed. Mr. Reed, you're contesting this. Am I understanding correctly? We both confirmed. Ms. Mercer, as the petitioner, you may present your case first. Diane's attorney stood. Your Honor, this case is about historical community usage. The HOA managed the lake for decades, invested in its upkeep, even installed infrastructure before Mr. Reed's ownership. She displayed logs, the 1998 valve modification, and meeting minutes. On the surface it seemed convincing, but I knew what was missing: legal authority, actual ownership. Precedent is clear, she pressed. Long stewardship equals adverse possession. The HOA effectively owned this lake. Judge Hartwell made a few notes. And you have proof of this continuous usage, records showing open, notorious occupation. Diane's attorney hesitated slightly. We have logs of upkeep activities, infrastructure investments. The judge leaned forward. But do you have records of actual physical control? Because adverse possession requires more than just interest. It requires actual possession. I watched Diane's attorney fumble with papers, realizing the weakness in their argument. They had evidence of HOA interest in some infrastructure work, but nothing showing actual possession. Your Honor, Diane's attorney continued, the infrastructure modifications themselves demonstrate possession. The HOA installed valves, managed water flow. Judge Hartwell interrupted. On property they didn't own without permission. That's not adverse possession. That's unlawful entry. She turned to me. Mr. Reed, your response? I stood, feeling calm. This was what I had prepared for. Your Honor, I have certified property deeds showing clear ownership. The lake and surrounding land were deeded to me 2 years ago through a legal sale. The title search showed no encumbrances, no claims of adverse possession. The HOA's infrastructure modifications were done without authority. They are evidence of unauthorized activity on private land. I presented my deed and had it marked as Exhibit A. The judge examined it carefully. This deed is properly recorded. The chain of title is clear. What about these HOA modifications? When did they occur? I pulled out the 1998 receipt. It was 27 years ago, long before my ownership, but the modifications were authorized by Diane Mercer without proper board approval. I had records showing she acted unilaterally, spending HOA funds without oversight. Diane's attorney objected. These are serious accusations. Judge Hartwell raised a hand. I'll allow it if Mr. Reed has supporting records. I nodded to Rebecca. She stood and approached the bench. Your Honor, I'm Rebecca Shaw, CPA. I've conducted a forensic analysis of the HOA's financials. May I testify? The judge agreed. Rebecca took the witness stand and was sworn in. She presented her findings methodically. Shell companies, fraudulent vendor payments, Diane's signature on unauthorized expenditures totaling $45,000. The 1998 valve modification is part of a pattern. Mercer has been using HOA resources for personal benefit for years. The lake infrastructure wasn't about managing the community, it was about setting up future revenue opportunities for herself. I watched Diane's face as Rebecca spoke, her carefully maintained composure beginning to crack. Judge Hartwell studied Rebecca's records. This is proof of embezzlement, not just a property dispute, Rebecca confirmed. Yes, Your Honor, Rebecca continued, and that's why the district attorney's office has opened a formal investigation, but it's relevant here because it shows motive. Ms. Mercer wasn't acting in the community's interest. I presented the emails Rebecca had found about the fishing company's lease negotiations. Diane had promised them access to the lake, even though she had no legal right to it, in exchange for $30,000. Judge Hartwell read through them, her expression darkening. Ms. Mercer, did you negotiate commercial use of property you didn't own? Diane stood and finally spoke. I was acting in the community's interest. The lease would have generated revenue for the HOA. The judge's voice turned sharp. Except for the property owner you were stealing from. I called James Mitchell next. He testified about the forged inspection request and the survey findings that confirmed my legal boundaries. Then Deputy Lewis presented the criminal case, unlawful entry charges. The roadblock, the unauthorized lock, the attempted break-in, every crime documented and evidenced. This isn't just a civil property dispute, Deputy Lewis said. Ms. Mercer has engaged in a sustained campaign of harassment and fraud. We have records of client defamation, threatening texts, and coordinated efforts to destroy Mr. Reed's livelihood. Diane's attorney tried to counter, arguing that emotions were running high and that some actions might have been excessive, but Judge Hartwell wasn't buying it. Counselor, your client committed fraud. She filed false inspection requests. She hired fake experts. She encroached. She attempted to break in. These aren't legitimate legal claims. These are crimes. The attorney sat down, defeat evident. I called my final witness, Patricia Williams. She testified about my restoration work, the fake consultant Diane had tried to use, and how my lake management exceeded all regulatory standards. In my professional opinion, Mr. Reed has demonstrated exemplary environmental stewardship. His work benefits the entire watershed. Judge Hartwell reviewed everything once more. The room was silent. Then she looked up directly at Diane. Miss Mercer, I've presided over many property disputes, but I've never seen anything quite like this. You fabricated conservation easements, you forged inspection requests, you encroached, you defamed, You attempted to interfere with Mr. Reed's business, all to steal property you had no legal right to, while embezzling from the community you claimed to represent. Diane's face went ashen. The judge continued, "The law is clear. Mr. Reed holds legal title, a recorded deed, and a clean chain of ownership. Your petition is denied." She paused. "Furthermore, I'm ordering that you cease all contact with Mr. Reed. No communication, no interference. Violation will result in contempt charges." The gavel fell, sharp, final, the sound of justice being served. Diane's attorney tried to argue for an appeal, but Judge Hartwell was already moving on. "Regarding criminal charges, those will be handled separately. But Ms. Mercer, I am forwarding this entire case file to the district attorney. Embezzlement, fraud, harassment. The evidence presented here is damning. I strongly suggest you retain criminal counsel." Diane stood, her legs shaking, and was guided out. I watched her leave, not feeling triumph, but exhaustion and relief. This nightmare was finally over. Outside, Rebecca and Mrs. Henderson were waiting. Mrs. Henderson pulled me into a hug. "It's done. You won." I had my property rights were confirmed. Diane was facing criminal prosecution. Everything I had fought for had mattered. The gavel had fallen, property rights were confirmed. Community healing had begun. 3 weeks after the hearing, I was sitting on my cabin porch when Mrs. Henderson's car pulled up. She wasn't alone. Rebecca was with her, and behind them, several other vehicles from the community. My first instinct was weariness, but Mrs. Henderson was smiling. "Mason, we wanted to talk to you, all of us." I stood slowly, watching as nearly a dozen HOA members gathered. One woman stepped forward. "Mr. Reed, I'm Sandra Mitchell. I was one of the people who believed Diane's lies. I voted to support her actions, and I need to apologize." Others nodded in agreement. A man in a work jacket spoke up. "We trusted her. We thought she had our best interests at heart. We didn't question the accusations." Sandra continued, her voice thick with regret. "We were wrong, and because of that you suffered. You lost business, dealt with harassment. We're so sorry." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to be angry. But looking at their faces, seeing the genuine remorse, I realized they had been victims too. "Thank you for coming here, for admitting it," I said quietly. Rebecca stepped forward. "There's more you should know. The fraud investigation is complete. Diane diverted $47,000 over 3 years. She's facing criminal charges, restitution to the HOA, and her real estate license has been suspended." I absorbed that she'd stolen from her own community, and when I'd threatened to expose it by not surrendering my lake, she'd tried to destroy me. Mrs. Henderson pulled out a folder. "We found more records. Diane had planned to lease your lake to multiple businesses, fishing operations, kayak rentals, even a small marina. She'd promised access she never had the legal right to give. When you bought the property with clear title, you destroyed years of planning. It all made horrible, calculated sense. You had been an obstacle to her fraud, so she tried every tactic to remove you." Sandra spoke again, her voice softer. "We're here to make this right. The HOA is voting to formally apologize. We'll send letters to the clients. Diane contacted. We'll help repair your professional reputation." A younger guy raised his hand. "We're also implementing new financial oversight, independent audits, and no more single signature authority." I felt something shift within me, not forgiveness exactly, but acceptance. Understanding that good people can be manipulated. "I appreciate that," I said. "But the best thing you can do now is learn from this. Question authority, demand accountability." They all nodded in agreement. After they left, Rebecca lingered. "There's something else. The district attorney wants you to testify at Diane's trial. They're pursuing multiple charges, and your testimony about the defamation campaign is crucial to showing the pattern of her behavior." I agreed without hesitation. "Whatever they need, she can't be allowed to do this to anyone else." Rebecca smiled. "Watching you, how you fought, how you documented everything and never stooped to her level, it taught me something. Integrity isn't just about avoiding wrong. It's about actively pursuing what's right, even when it costs you." A month later, I attended Diane's sentencing. The courtroom was packed. The prosecutor laid out everything: misappropriation, fraudulent schemes, the harassment campaign. Diane's attorney tried to argue mitigating circumstances, citing her gambling addiction and financial pressure, but the judge wasn't swayed. "Miss Mercer," the judge said, "you held a position of trust, and instead of honoring that, you stole from them. And when Mr. Reed's legitimate ownership threatened your criminal enterprise, you waged a campaign to destroy him. You broke laws repeatedly and deliberately. These were not crimes of passion. These were calculated actions." The sentence came down: 3 years of probation, $45,000 in restitution, community service, and a permanent prohibition from holding any HOA leadership position. Her real estate license was revoked. It wasn't jail time, but it was justice. Appropriate consequences. As we filed out of the courtroom, I saw Diane being led away. She looked smaller, diminished. Her once polished confidence was completely gone. I didn't feel satisfaction, just closure. 2 months after the sentencing, I received an unexpected call from a water rights organization. They wanted me to speak at their regional conference. Your case has become something of a landmark, property owners successfully defending their rights through proper documentation. We'd love for you to share your experience. I accepted. Standing before engineers and property owners, sharing my story, felt surreal, but I focused on the lessons. Document everything, follow proper procedures, build your case methodically. The response was overwhelming. People thanked me, shared their own stories of disputes. I realized that my nightmare with Diane had value. It could teach others. Rebecca's testimony about forensic accounting became part of HOA training programs, and Patricia's environmental assessment methods were adopted as standard practices. Something good had come from all that darkness. My business recovered. Clients who had left came back, and new clients found me. The lake restoration became a case study for others to follow. Local schools brought students in for ecology lessons. One afternoon, I was giving a tour of the lake to a group of environmental science students when I noticed something. On the shore, where Diane's barrier had once blocked the road, wildflowers had begun to grow. Nature was reclaiming what had once been corrupted. It felt symbolic, healing over damage, beauty emerging from conflict. The students asked questions about the restoration, about the legal challenges, and about standing up for what's right. The most important thing is knowing your rights, understanding the law, because when you know you're right and you have evidence, no amount of intimidation can break you. A student raised her hand. But what if the other person keeps escalating? I thought about Diane's progression. You document it all, every violation, every crime, because eventually the system catches up. Justice might be slow, but it always comes, especially when you provide clear evidence. After the tour, I sat alone on the dock. The lake was thriving. Everything I'd planned had come to fruition. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Mrs. Henderson. New HOA president elected. A young woman with a CPA background. First order of business, implementing Rebecca's recommended financial controls. Real change is happening. I smiled. The community was healing. That evening I installed a new sign at the lake entrance: lawfully protected waters. Community education site, visitors welcome. Because the best response to someone trying to steal what's yours isn't building walls. It's opening doors, sharing the resource. 6 months after the trial, I organized a community gathering. Not a tense meeting, but a celebration. Families arrived, kids splashed in the water, adults brought food. Even some former Diane supporters showed up. Rebecca approached with lemonade. You did it, not just once. You rebuilt. I looked around at the neighbors laughing, the children playing. This was victory, not in crushing an enemy, but in creating something better. We did it, I said, all of us. Everyone who chose truth over convenience. As the sun set, I sat on my porch, watching the peaceful scene before me. It felt like vindication not just of my property rights, but of the choice to fight honorably. Diane had tried every dirty tactic, but I had beaten them all by simply being right, by having evidence, by trusting the system to recognize the truth. My cabin, my lake, my peace, all intact, all protected, all legally, undeniably mine. That sign by the lake entrance stood as a permanent reminder. This water was lawfully mine, but its purpose was to serve everyone. Teaching, healing, showing that property rights and community benefit aren't opposites, they're partners when ownership comes with responsibility. Diane Mercer had tried to take everything, but instead she had given me something unexpected, a platform, a story that could help others. Sometimes the worst attacks become the best lessons. Sometimes fighting for what's right does more than protect your own interests. It protects the principle itself, and sometimes fighting for your rights also protects everyone's rights. Saying that out loud felt like the first real breath I'd had in months. This ordeal had started with a fake binder and ended with a community finally understanding what accountability truly means. Maybe the real lesson here is that standing your ground isn't just stubbornness, it's about protecting principles bigger than yourself. If you're still here, tell me in the comments, what did this story make you feel, and what would you have done? If it resonated with you and you want to support the channel, feel free to tap that little thanks button below. I'm improving bit by bit, and if you think I did well, leave a kind word to keep me going. Take care of your lakes, your land, and your peace. I'll catch you out by the water. Thanks for watching. Share this video with someone who loves a good plot twist. And don't forget to subscribe.